Everybody. My name is Roger Green, and I run the New York School of Feng Shui. I have a presentation this evening. It's a PowerPoint presentation, so I want to take you through what is Feng Shui, a little bit of the history, some of the approaches that we use, some of the techniques that we use in what we call classical Feng Shui. And then towards the end of the presentation, if you've got any questions, more than happy to answer them for you. So I'm just going to share my screen and find the, that's good. So here we go. So I've been running the New York School of Feng Shui for about 15 years. And I originally started this program in Sydney, Australia. So in the good old days, you know, that's about 25, 30 years ago, there was only 1 or 2 books on Feng Shui. So I was already running a program in Taoist healing modalities. I was running a cooking school, a natural healing center. We had a shiatsu program, and we were teaching Chinese healing herbs and so forth. And I wanted to do what was called the 8 limbs of traditional Chinese medicine, and that is putting all the modalities together. So I started to write a Feng Shui curriculum, you know, 35 years ago. And Feng Shui wasn't very well known then. And I always call it the last kid on the block. Since the last 100 years, we've been having these waves of integration from the Eastern cultures on themes of their energetic view, their cosmology, their martial arts, their food as medicine, acupuncture, and Feng Shui was the last sort of gift, as the environmental gift. And so I wrote the curriculum and I started to teach it in Sydney, Australia. And then shortly after that, 1 or 2 years after that, I got invited to teach in America and London and Austria and all over the world, because essentially people had just started to become interested. There were some more books being published and they wanted a practitioner training. So I spent a good couple of decades traveling the world and teaching a lot of people what I call classical Feng Shui. And these days I just run the program here in New York. I have in the past sponsored a lot of Feng Shui and ecology and sacred geometry conferences. I always felt there was this dynamic that Feng Shui blends itself with our Western Feng Shui, which you could roughly call sacred geometry. And of course, our emerging eco-design principles. So I put on quite a few international conferences all over the world. And I've also in the past sponsored tours, Feng Shui tours to China and Taiwan. And we also put on tours to South America and pretty much all over the world. And I have a sister school here in New York. It's called the Academy Sacred Geometry. We do various sponsorships from time to time. And I always felt that learning sacred geometry is a very important component of also learning these environmental arts. So I have been sponsoring sacred geometry events for a good 2 decades. We run the Academy Healing Nutrition here in New York. That's essentially how I started off in my career, as somebody who's very passionate about food as medicine and what I call the longevity diet and natural healing. And I've always, to a degree, integrated that into my Feng Shui training. And I also run a company called Breakthrough Technologies, where we investigate how we can put a lot of these theories and philosophies, especially around say, sacred geometry and modern cutting edge physics, how we can bring that to the marketplace with efficiencies in energy production and agriculture and so forth. So yes, I've been doing this for quite some time. As you can see from the slide, sort of maybe 40 to 60 countries, and pretty much was the first person in Australia and to a degree Europe and pretty much to a degree in the United States to start to teach what we call classical Feng Shui. So there's some various schools of Feng Shui. I always sort of felt appropriate that we should learn what people were doing in Hong Kong and China and Taiwan. So I made the effort to organize the first international Feng Shui tour of China in 1996. And I've been able to refine my curriculum over the years. Now, Feng Shui is part of what we call the 8 rays of traditional Chinese medicine. So I mentioned this in my introduction, that I had a school in Australia and we were teaching all of these approaches: acupuncture, massage, herbal medicine, food as medicine, martial arts, meditation, and Feng Shui and cosmology. So Feng Shui started off a long time ago, as you can imagine, in China. It has a long history to it. It's been, gone through different evolutions, so to speak. It's fairly embraced now in the East and the West. For a while there, it was suppressed when the Chinese communists came to town. So, but now that China's opening up more and more, it's a lot more open now around Feng Shui. But it was suppressed for a long time in China. And of course, all of that information was kept in, to a degree, academically with their professors of history and culture and so forth. But of course, it maintained its integrity in Hong Kong and in Taiwan. It started off with what we call the form school, which is looking at the shapes of hills and rivers and how to build villages and temples and so forth. And then as their cosmology developed, they started to integrate a lot more of their cosmology into the fabric of what we call Feng Shui. So an ancient name for Feng Shui is Kan Yu. This word K-A-N is roughly a Chinese word that represents it's like an umbrella that we're opening, and it's representing all of the cosmological chi, which is absolutely immense. And of course, where planet Earth absorbs that, just like our body absorbs that. So it's very much associated with what we call heaven's chi and cosmology and the invisible world and the metaphysics. Now, the Taoists developed some wonderful cosmology, very elegant, very simple to understand with their yin and yang philosophy, to start to map the cycles of heaven and then work out our relationship with those cycles with the themes of their astrology and I Ching and so forth. The other side to this is what we call Yu. This word Y-U is roughly a word that you could call like geology to a degree. It's more associated with tangible, physical, and visible world. So the ancient name was Kan Yu. So the word Feng Shui was coined later on around the year from memory in 900 AD with Gua Po, one of the writers of early Feng Shui. So here we have the classical Feng Shui. I'm just going to have to close this door. my neighbors have just started to put on some really, really serious music. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Could you turn that music down a bit, mate? Could you turn the music down a bit? We've got a meeting in here. Could you turn it down a little bit? Welcome. Welcome to New York. Never a dull moment. So where were we? Classical Feng Shui. So it's made up of what we call the form school and the compass school. So as I've mentioned, this idea of there's a physical and an intangible aspect of Feng Shui. So the form school is very much to do with the tangible space, the furniture, the layout, the feel, the design. It's somewhat of an intuitive approach. But yeah, it's like we get into, the colors, the shapes, the forms, and the feeling side. Now, the compass school is a little bit more working with the metaphysics and the invisible aspect, or if you like, the astrology. So it's the astrology of the person. Now, this word astrology is different to the way we think of it in the West. It's not Western astrology. We're using the trigrams and the animal signs and cycles of heaven and earth into what we call the Taoist calendar, which is made up of the 5 elements and the animal signs. So it becomes a cycle of 60 hours, 60 days, 60 months, 60 years, and so forth. And out of that cosmological view, there was some very, very important techniques that we use in classical Feng Shui for our Feng Shui approach. That is the Ba Gua, the Ming Gua, and Ba Zai. So this word Ming means destiny, Ba means 8, and Gua means trigram. And so you've got 8 trigrams, and you've got your destiny trigram, and Ba Zai, this word Zai means house. So that's 8 house. So that's some very, very interesting techniques that we apply to the floor plan and integrate our clients, integrate their astrology into the form school. Now, the flying star is essentially the aspect of bringing time back into the situation. So the form school is very much your spatial aspects of design, whereas the compass school starts to bring in this dynamic of space and time. So it's very, very dynamic. The 4 pillars astrology, better correct that there, 4 pillars astrology. This is your personal destiny chart made up from the hour of your birth. So we construct a chart that has your hour, day, a month, and year. And out of that, we extract your so-called lucky elements, and we can look at all sorts of aspects to your overall destiny and what sort of brings a little bit more resonance or luck into the situation. And often we put all of this together in the use of the Lo Pan. So the Lo Pan is the Chinese cosmological compass that you learn to use in my training. So moving on to the next slide here. So Feng Shui, bringing it up into the 21st century, so to speak, it's, we're now dealing with, thousands and thousands of toxins and unhealthy buildings and a lot of environmental factors. And Feng Shui has always been, for me, like cutting edge pioneer movement of integrating more nature back into our designs and making our living environments more healthy and dynamic and full of potentials. So we've been promoting, you know, solar and sustainable products and bringing this spirituality, if you like, back into the design. Obviously, our guiding force is the yin and yang principle. It pervades everything. So in the training, you can get a really, really good grounding in yin and yang with the, first of all, the focus of using yin and yang in your own life first, for instance, your diet and your lifestyle, and, you know, bringing a little bit more balance back into your active life and so forth. And then we start to apply it into the Feng Shui approach. So everything is basically an elaboration of this yin and yang principle. We use the so-called Sanchai, the three treasures. This is the Taoist principle that we're made up of these three major energetic functions. There's the cosmology, which we're absorbing. We also absorb the energy and the rhythms of earth. And so we live between heaven and earth, and out of that has produced humanity. So heaven, earth, and humanity. So the three treasures makes up a lot of food energetics and herbal medicines, because it's the shun and the qi in the blood and your ancestral gene. But you'll notice when you get into the training that a lot of the cosmology has this three treasures. Even a trigram, which has three lines, which makes up a hexagram out of the I Ching, that's made up of the three treasures. So this word qi or life force, if you wanted to roughly put it into the Western concept of like electromagnetic energy, although that doesn't really describe it, it's only like a fraction of it. We can use the word shakti or charge or prana. Another one is just good old information. Getting to know energy and vibration gives you the ability to start to read information again, information of your environment, of your feng shui, of your diet, and so forth. And it's a very rational process. Yin and yang is very rational. Cold is made up of this duality of the universe that we live in, up and down, male, female, fast and slow. So we really get into that. It originally started, the first definition of yin and yang was the shady side of the hill and the sunny side of the hill. And of course, we can apply directions to that, north and south. So if you live in the northern hemisphere, the sun is going to go high to the south and sink in the west and go low to the north, and it's going to rise again in the east. So that's why in our cosmological maps, we draw south at the top, because that's the most yang position, and we draw north down the bottom because that's the yin position. Now, I have been the pioneer and the first in the world to create a system of feng shui for the southern hemisphere, where I took the Taoist principle of observing your nature and then starting to make these energetic maps. Because the energy in the southern hemisphere, the sun goes high to the north and it sinks in the west and it goes low to the south. So I started to recreate that, and not only in the form school with the basic solar design, but also in the Minghua, Bazai, flying star, and the four pillars. I'm not going to be getting into that in our presentation this evening, but my workbooks are full of the unique understanding of applying this to the southern hemisphere, and I take students through that whole process of how to reapply things for the southern hemisphere. So you learn the northern hemisphere first, even though if you're some of my students are obviously from the southern hemispheres, but we learn the northern hemisphere first and all those concepts and principles, and then you're ready to understand how I applied everything for the southern hemisphere. So what we do with Feng Shui is we balance and harmonize heaven, earth, and humanity, the invisible with the visible, and so forth. And we bring the human back into our the flow of nature. And we also look at things like how to optimize the space and how to work with the so-called negative energies. There's this term that we use, Sha Qi and Shen Qi, and I have a slide for that coming up soon. We also use the 5-element theory, so yin and yang, the 5 elements. The 5 elements is your organ system in the body. We use it a lot in the Academy Healing Nutrition and Acupuncture to understand health dynamics and oriental diagnosis. And it also applies to the Feng Shui. It's used a lot. So our compass is made up of the 5 elements. The Bagua is made up of the sun's pattern is made up of the 5 elements. So we get into this idea that Feng Shui is about containment of energy and an attraction of energy. So the yang is the carrier of qi and the yin is the containment of qi. And that's symbolized by what we call the mountain and the river. So here's a little picture of the ideal Feng Shui with the mountain or the wall. This is mountain-like behind you that gives you the support and definition of your place. And then the energy is coming towards you through the so-called lake or the ocean or the river, or it could be the pathway up into your house. So we look at these ideal design principles first, and then we start to apply them to our imperfect world, and we try to work back to the perfect world as much as we can. So you've got to learn this sort of this ideal Feng Shui, and then once you've got that, then it gives you what to aim for when you're doing a Feng Shui consultation. So I take you through all of these design processes in the training. Here's one of the most important concepts. Shen Qi is the positive energy. We love it. We love being around it. Nature is full of Shen Qi. It's a cycle, spiral, curvy energy. Whereas a lot of man-made forms are very straight and angular, and we call that Sha Qi. So the heavy traffic coming towards you, the noise from your next door neighbors, and various design components can just be a little bit too intense on us and makes us feel uncomfortable. So when a place is full of Shen Qi, you just love being there. And people are going, wow, this is great, I love being here. Or like sacred spaces are just full of this vibrant, positive energy. And then other places you go to, you go, let's go. It just doesn't feel right. You know, the energy is very low and it can be somewhat toxic and it just feels very, very uncomfortable. So our job is to maximize the Shen Qi as a Feng Shui practitioner and to block out or minimize and counteract the Sha Qi. So it's a very, very important, a very, very practical principle to work from when you're doing Feng Shui. We're into this idea of fractals in the sense that the human is a micro of the macro, and so is your house. It's a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we work from the small to the large, and we work from the large to the small. This is called embedding, getting you back into the embeddedness of nature again. Obviously, working with the harmony and spirit of nature is a lot of our work in Feng Shui. And, you know, here's a beautiful example of a Feng Shui garden and gateways and pathways and so forth. So there is a section in my first module where I talk about how you can integrate the principles of the Feng Shui garden into even your simple little balcony garden, you know, which is just 6 foot by 2 feet sometimes. It's all about learning the principles and then applying them. Here's an example of the sun's pattern. You can see the 5 elements to a degree here. The north is the water element and the south, The red phoenix is the fire element. And then there's your starting point for your solar design house, where we put the more yin rooms towards the cooler part of the house, and the yang rooms like the kitchen and the living room and so forth to the more warmer parts of the house. This is an example of starting to use yang rooms. They're more active social rooms like the kitchen living room, and the, for instance, the more active, not the study, but more like the active home office. Whereas obviously the opposite to that is storage rooms and bedrooms and quiet spaces and so forth, is the more yin rooms. Here's an example of how we start to apply what we call the 5 elements to shapes, to various buildings and the influences of this. This is one of the most famous icons in the world, the Sydney Opera House. It's beautifully embedded in terms of its elemental dynamics. The wavy-like structure is the water element, and of course it's embedded into the harbour. I'll quickly go through this. We use wood, fire, earth, metal as associative thinking. The wood and the 5 elements and so forth, there's a color, there's a shape, there's an organ, there's a direction, and that makes up this a framework of mind, body, and spirit, or taking us from the tangible to the intangible in a very logical, scientific, archetypal way. So it's a fascinating study. So in the training, we really get into the applying and understanding the 5 elements, both internally and externally. So we can look at various materials and colors and shapes, and to integrate that into our Feng Shui. We also use this principle as a system of remedies when we have to deal with Sha Qi or an excess of one element. We can bring some elemental movement back into that mix. The Bagua. So moving now on, that's a little bit of an introduction for you into what we call the form school, using some of these design principles and Sha Qi and Shen Qi and Yin and Yang and the 5 elements. And there is a system of remedies and Feng Shui solutions that I take you through in the first module. And then the second module, we enter into what we call the compass school techniques, and this starts with the Bagua, which is a system of mapping the cosmological flow with the 8 trigrams. And for instance, we also have a numerology system. This is called the Lo Shu. The numbers between 1 and 9 are mapped onto the Lo Shu. So now we have the directions, numbers, and trigrams. And that starts to build up our cosmological grid. Here's just a simple way to start to understand that the spring, summer, and autumn is the yin and yang energies. And we start to build that up. Now we've got the 12 months of the year with the yin and yang symbol, with the solstices at the very, very top. So the summer solstice is at the top, and the winter solstice is right down there in the middle in December. And then we can start to build up our hourly qi flows. So we have 12 animal signs, we have 12 months of the year, and each animal is a 2-hour period during the day. So 12 times 2 is 24 hours. And we now have the directions on that. Here is an example of what we call the binomials calendar, which is heaven and earth. This is the Taoist calendar made up of the 60 combinations. So these are in my workbook. I've got a very, very easy step-by-step flow of how to construct some of these sophisticated charts. I've been a detective of this, as you know, for 3 to 4 decades now. So one of my themes was always how to make this accessible to the Western mind and to take them through these rather complex systems, and to simplify them and make them, to bring some clarity to them, and how to apply them into these practical situations. So this is just some examples of the 5-element chi flows and the earthly branches. Now you can see the rat, the ox, the tiger, the rabbit, etc., which starts to make up our compass and our cosmological grid. And it's the way we start to apply some of the trigrams and the personal astrology into the Feng Shui situation. So this is all put on to these wonderful transparencies that I've got for you. And so here's a little case history. I take you through how to do practical Feng Shui. Part of the work is also you do a project that's part of your examination. I'll talk a little bit about what's required for the training towards the end of this presentation. But I take you through how to do a Feng Shui consultation and how to start to apply some of these techniques onto the floor plan. And how to apply for instance, the Minghua, the Barzai, and the Flying Star charts. It's a very, very interesting system. And you can, it's quite satisfying working with Feng Shui and helping people, with their life destiny, so to speak. And yeah, we get into directionology. This is called the Minghua system. So we work out your personal directions that are quite auspicious for you. And we can integrate that into your office and sleeping directions and all sorts of things, including if a house is more suitable for you, we can help clients select houses or apartments that are more suitable for their makeup, so to speak. And working with Flying Star. Flying Star is one of the most dynamic systems in Feng Shui. It's a great technique to work with. I often just work with the form school and the Flying Star technique, and then of course integrating their astrology through the 4 pillars. So here I just thought I'd throw in a little quote from Yogananda. The environment is more powerful than you are, so be careful where you place yourself. So we're getting towards the end of the presentation now. There is a component in our training where I've integrated sacred geometry. So, and it's a 4-day training as part of the practitioner course. And it's specifically for Feng Shui practitioners. So we're applying some of the energy grids and looking at it in terms of the golden mean ratio and these harmonics and ratios that we've been using for tens of thousands of years, in our universal design principles. You find sacred geometry both in the East and the West. And so it's for me, it's a very, very important aspect to integrate. Here's some examples of from one of my colleagues, Michael Rice, who's this wonderful bioarchitect designer. And we will be doing a webinar with him again soon. And some beautiful spaces. So it's a language of shapes and numbers and patterns. Great way of investigating how nature is made up of the golden mean ratio and how it grows, in terms of its expansion and contraction. And of course, we can use sacred geometry in a lot of cutting edge physics and this marriage of spirituality and science. I think the sacred geometry really bridges those two worlds. So yeah, there's a lot of problems in the world with greenhouse gases and energy inefficiencies and so forth. And the average home now contains a lot of toxic chemicals, and health statistics have gone off the chart. So first of all, using diet, of course, to stabilize that is very, very important, hence the Academy Healing Nutrition. And then bringing in the Feng Shui, I think, is the kind of the ultimate package to bring health and vitality and a positive destiny back into people's life. So Feng Shui and the Academy of Healing Nutrition complement each other very, very well. The Feng Shui gives us a chance to educate people about what we call the healthy home, bringing in, getting rid of all the toxins and bringing in more natural energies. So here's a little, are you ready for a change? You might be thinking of getting into Feng Shui. It's a great kind of education and sort of an exciting career path that you could integrate with some of your existing career pathways if you're already an architect or you're a natural healer and so forth. Or people just do this for their own life, and they can help, of course, their family members. It's just a fascinating study anyway. Or, of course, you can make a career pathway out of this training. This is a practitioner's training course. So now the structure of this is we've got 6 online modules. So each module is made up of a 4-day training that has been previously filmed. It was filmed a couple of years ago. I haven't had to change the curriculum for a long, long time. And you do those 6 modules in your own pace. So when you're ready, I send you a lovely workbook that's like over 700 pages. And then I send you the link and the password for module 1. And you go through that in your own time. And when you're ready, I'll send you the link to module 2. And so you can progress through the training over the 6 modules. It usually takes about 8 to 12 months on average, but the timeline is pretty much yours. Now, each module to a degree is self-contained because I pretty much cover just about all the questions that you're going to ask, because I've been training people in these techniques for over 20 years. So I pretty much know how to kind of deliver how to get this done. But after each module, if you want a personal coaching session, no extra price or charge or anything, we just organize a Skype meeting after you're finished your module, and you'd have your questions all prepared, and I'll answer all of the questions and just clarify what you didn't quite understand. Now, we have a 4-day training in-house in New York starting in 2018, November the 15th to the 18th. So if that's happening this Thursday, so it's 4 days, and it's completely optional and it's completely free. So yes, the Feng Shui practitioner course is made up of you watching the 6 online modules, full stop. That's a complete training. You do not have to do the in-house 4-day training. However, if you want to come and experience the in-house training, I highly recommend it. We've got people flying in from all over the world. And over those 4 days, we're able to do some practical work, and I'm able to give you an introduction to all of the techniques that you'll be experiencing in your online training. Now, for those who have also started the online training, because you can pretty much start the online training anytime you want, they can come to the in-house and get their, you know, some extra clarification, some extra tuition, and get their questions answered as well, and as well as experience some of the practical work. We did film some of the practical work for the online training as well. And that all happens here in Manhattan. So it's these modules you watch in your own time, and we cover all of those form score, Barzai, Ningua, Flying Star, Four Pillars, Sacred Geometry. Now there's also an exam and a project. So the exam is a done exam. For instance, it's a revision exam. So I send you, it's about 120 questions. By the time you've got to module 4 or 5, you can ask for the exam, and you do it in your own time. And then it is reviewed in one of the online modules. I think it's module 5 that the exam is completely reviewed. So obviously you do it without looking at the online component. And also I review it here online, in-house, and go through some of the more trickier questions. So you do that in your own time, the revision exam, and you do one project. And that's where you've documented doing a Feng Shui consultation and using some of these techniques. So you send that into here, into New York, and I look through it. I might discuss things with you over Skype, and then pretty much that is the qualification to graduate. So you watch the 6 modules, you do the exam, you do a project, and that's the practitioner course. I issue the certificate as a Feng Shui practitioner. The fee for this, if you pay it all up, is only just $2,700. Usually people are just paying by credit card. So once the fee is processed, you can pretty much start the program. Then if you wanted a payment plan, it's $3,200. So you could pay that over, you know, if you like, the 10 months. So, but you would start with a $600 deposit, and then I can make up a payment plan for you there. So that's pretty much it for the presentation. The website is fengshuiseminars.com, and the email is info@fengshuiseminars.com. So I'm going to stop my sharing the screen there. So I covered a lot of ground. Now, this is a good opportunity for you guys to ask any questions you want.